Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with a quick question I want to ask you before we get started. Do you consider yourself a Timmy player? Do you like +1/+1 counter strategies? Are you on a budget? Well, have I got the deck for you. So let's check out the gameplay and I'll show you what I have in mind. Okay, so to begin, let's look at our hand real quick to see what we've got. Okay, so we got 2 Hydra's Growth, Crystalline Giant, and Hardened Scales. Alright, I'm liking this. Let's keep it. Let's go ahead and let's play. Alright, place down a Forest. Hardened Scales. Alright, so we're going to start building up a ton of counters in a little bit. Place down a Castle of Vantress. We draw. Forest. Let's put down an Iron Apprentice, which gets an extra counter thanks to Hardened Scales. Emergence Zone. Okay, looks like we might be dealing with a control deck here of some kind. They're looking at our thing. Peerless Voyage. Aww. Looks like they have some tempo plays, which is going to be really annoying for us because we can't keep any of our counters on our creatures. But that's okay. We'll make it. Let's put down the Crystalline Giant this time. And alright. It's got a flying counter. An island. They're looking again. Fateful Absence. Alright. Well, we're going to be struggling for a little bit here to try to keep one of our creatures on the board. But we'll keep trying, everyone. Okay, let's try this again. Iron Apprentice. There we go. Resolves. Paradise Druid. It resolves. Okay. We're looking good right now. Paradise Druid has hexproof, so it can't be targeted. So we're going to hopefully be able to dump our Hydra's Growth in just a minute. Smothering Tide. Oh, boy. Our opponent's going to try to combo off. Do we pay? No. They can keep a treasure for now. But we should be able to pull this off here. Hydra's Growth. Okay. That's a 4/4. Okay, so we're going to start swinging with Iron Apprentice to start closing out this game. Hopefully we get enough counters that even if it gets destroyed, we can dump all the counters on Paradise Druid and still get a win here. Opponent, Secret Rendezvous. That's spicy. Alright, so we both draw 3. That also means they get some treasures, so they get to build their resources up really quick here. Obviously, we're not going to be able to pay, so we'll let that resolve. So they have a lot of mana to work with. They're checking our cards. The Lincoln... Okay, Tameo Safekeeping. There it is. Fateful Absence. We will protect it again. So we are vulnerable for a moment here. But we need to make sure Iron Apprentice at least gets strong enough so we can close out this game quick in a big swing here. Alright, 9/9 now. Smothering Tide. Alright, we're going to pay this time. Put down a Forest. We can afford it for now. Tenacious Pup. Alright. There we go. Okay. Let's smash away with our Iron Apprentice. If we're lucky, if it sticks, we can close out this game next turn. And the turn, what does our opponent do? Omen of the Seas. They will draw a card and get to do some scrying, but they need an answer here. If they don't have an answer, we win. 2 to the bottom. They draw. Blink of an Eye. Ugh. We don't have a choice here. Alright, so we lose our Iron Apprentice for a moment. Temple. They scry 1. To the top. Looks like they have an answer now. Soul Guide Lantern. Okay. That's actually okay. Blue. Draw a card while we can. Smothering Tide triggers. Soul Guide Lantern. They will exile something from our graveyard. Thankfully, we're not a graveyard deck. We don't have to worry about that. So we go. Smothering Tide. Okay. Let's see. Alright. Second Paradise Druid. This one, however, will now have Tenacious Pup's abilities activate onto it. So now it gets a bunch of counters. Alright. So this is actually why you can see why Paradise Druid is a thing right now. So it's protecting itself as we swing. So even if our other 2 creatures get blown up here, our Paradise Druid here has enough tokens, has Trample, Vigilance, and Hexproof. It'll be really hard for our opponent to deal with. Let's put down our other Iron Apprentice. Feeling a little greedy now. And pass the turn. Before, however, we get to the end of this, let's stop for a second and let's actually show you the full deck tech, and we'll get right back to this match to show you how it ends. Okay, everybody, so what you just saw right there from the basic part of the game plan is we are trying to create one really big creature with counters galore. And in order to do that, however, we want to make sure we get something that can not only either protect itself or find a way to protect our creature. That's why, as you can see, for our Jolly Green Counters deck, our biggest game plan, of course, is to focus on Hardened Scales and the Ozolith. These 2 cards work in tandem because with Hardened Scales, this will add on extra +1/+1 counters to our creatures. And if they do get blown up, the Ozolith, think of it like a bank, which will then bring those counters back onto it, but then can put them onto our next creature when we have something out. Speaking of our creatures for the game plan, we have a couple of them that are mostly just focused on either presenting those counters onto something else building themselves up or finding a way to utilize them for other means such as protection. So we have Barkhai Troll and Paradise Druid. Both of these creatures have an advantage where Paradise Druid can either help us ramp in the early game, in the mid or late game. It has its own way of protecting itself with Hexproof, which we can then put counters on it and make it stronger. Barkhai Troll already comes in with a counter, which can then go off with the hardened scales. And the other advantage is if we need to give it Hexproof, we can remove a counter from it, paying 1 and then giving it Hexproof. Of course, the other cards to support this game plan, in the 1-drop slot we have Tenacious Pup. Gives us 1 little extra life gain, not a big deal, but it doesn't hurt either. And again, this gives us bonus counters to whatever comes in next. So it would bring in either a +1/+1 counter, a trample counter, and a vigilance counter onto any one of our creatures. Ideally, play Tenacious Pup into Paradise Druid, so this way Paradise Druid never has to untap and keeps its protection up at all times. Iron Apprentice, as you saw in the early game, just is a simple, cute little card, but if we can build up enough counters on it and it does die, it just passes off those counters to another one of our creatures we have on the board. A couple other ways we have of getting through to our game plan is we have Kodama of the West Tree. Anytime we have a modified creature, it gains trample. So with that, all of our creatures that have a +1/+1 counter on it does allow Kodama's ability to go off, which means we can force through damage even against chump blockers. In order to make sure we have a big enough creature, however, to get through and dish out enough damage for a lethal, is we will have Hydra's Growth, which can then keep doubling up counters on it every single time on our upkeep. Other creatures that we have to support the game plan, Crystalline Giant, which can then randomize other counters. It's not too much of a big threat on its own until it gets enough damage through with its other abilities. However, by getting it all built up onto one creature, and if we have to, again, it goes off with Ozolith in case if it does die. Same thing, we're passing off the counters to it, which can then put it onto another creature, and it's basically kind of a fun relay game. Ideally, the way you want to play the deck, if you haven't already noticed, is try to only stick to 1, maybe 2 threats on the board. So this way, whatever you have counters on can be passed off to the other creature in case if one of them gets blown up. However, we do have ways of still protecting ourselves through both spot removal and wraths. So besides our hexproof creatures, we are utilizing a set of Tamiyo safekeeping. So these not only give your creature hexproof, but also indestructible, and we gain a little bit of life back. So even against wraths, we basically can still force through damage and ensure that we can still get our win. Other ways of pumping ourselves up, we have Pollen Bright Druid, which can put a counter on something, or we can trigger off Proliferate. Ideally, if you have at least 1 or 2 threats out, Proliferate is a lot better than just putting a counter on, but it doesn't still hurt to have it in case we need to. And then finally, a single copy of the Great Henge. This expensive card will get super cheap as long as we have a very powerful creature on board, and it helps us ramp a little bit while also gaining life. So anytime also, as you see, when a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. One more time, again, the whole game plan is get that one creature out and then start building it up and force damage through, protect it with one of our other cards, and just make sure that our opponent just has no way of dealing with it. The only other way we can get through all of this is in case if everything does have no way of either attacking or getting through. As long as we can get trample on something, ram through kind of provides us as a plan B, or even I would say plan C to the deck. As you see, it deals damage to a creature equal to its power, and any extra damage can be dealt to their face if our creature has trample. Since we just mentioned that a couple of our cards do provide trample for our other creatures, if we time it right and if we have to, we can still force through a little extra damage just to help close out the game. As for your lands, really simple, 17 forests and 2 gingerbread cabins. The gingerbread cabins are only just here to give us a little extra food tokens. Again, it's just to help provide a little extra insulation versus aggro decks. I don't have really much I want to say too much about the sideboard. As we've seen with these other videos, we're mostly focusing on in the gameplay best of 1, but if you want to do something real quick, as you can see right here from our best of 3 sample options, you have Chainweb, Arachneer. The spider just deals a little extra damage and deals with flyers, and also the counters it can have on it when we escape really also make it a very powerful threat in the mid to late game. A couple copies of Snakeskin Veil, mostly again just extra protection. Soul Guide Lantern for graveyard hate. Monoskellion is kind of like a plan C, plan D to the deck. If you want to pseudo burn out your opponent by utilizing the counters, it can build up and then ping our opponent for 1 damage each. Destiny Spinner is here for the control decks, and of course a little artifact and enchantment hate and some extra graveyard hate is in Return to Nature. But otherwise, there you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed more or less the simple, straightforward plan. Get a creature out, protect it, smash our opponent, and get your win in. Speaking of that, let's now jump back into the previous game to show you how we may be able to win this. And if you do like these videos and anything I do, all I ask for you is to give a like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you can enjoy everything from my gameplay, deck techs, booster pack openings, and so much more. Right where we left off, they are at 4, we're at 25. We have lethal on board. They need a Wrath to destroy us and close out this game. Emergency power. Okay, so they are trying to combo off here. Ugh. Okay, so here's how we're going to do this, everybody. Here's how we survive. Tamiyo safekeeping. We're going to put this on the Paradise Druid, which sounds redundant with the hexproof, but it also gives it indestructible. So this means even if they find a Wrath here, our Paradise Druid will survive everything for the turn. Okay. Emergency powers. We all draw new cards. That will trigger off Smothering Tithe. Whew. That is a lot of treasures. Secret Rendezvous again. We draw 3. They draw 3. They make more tokens. Another Secret Rendezvous. Our opponent is getting a little dangerously close to either going off here or we actually might be able to still win. So their risky game plan does mean that we may actually be able to survive all of this. They have more than enough mana to counter anything we have, but we have our answers also in hand. Step through the formula. Okay. That's interesting. Fateful Absence. That's fine. That's actually okay. Our Iron Apprentice dies, but we can now pass off the counters to the Paradise Druid that still has everything else protecting it. I don't know how our opponent actually gets rid of that. The only way they can get rid of it is they would need something that does a mass exile, and I don't think they have it. Starting to hand size. All right. We draw. They make a third treasure. Okay, we'll let them have the treasure. Okay. This is it here. All right, we'll make a food. We just need to swing here. Just in case, we'll play Ozolith. So this gives us at least something in case everything does get destroyed by here by some miraculous reason. Okay, swinging time. Opponent, now or never. Do you have an answer? Okay, Desperation, draw. Sacrifice the Soul Guide Lantern. They get another card. Do they have anything? Is this it? Do we win? And we get there. Okay, that was lovely, everybody. Okay, I really hope you enjoyed that. That was fabulous. So there you go, everybody. That was overall our game plan. And I'll be honest with you, I think triggering off the Tamiyo safekeeping before our opponent went completely off is probably what helped us win the game, because they had no way of getting rid of it aside from exiling the whole board. So that's what I'm going to attribute our victory to. But in any case, as you saw, the biggest advantage we have in our deck is we do have a lot of ways of protecting ourselves versus spot removal, and even though you didn't see it in that match, we do technically have ways of dealing with Wraths. So that is your biggest advantage when playing this deck. You have a lot of easy ways of just forcing through that damage. However, that doesn't mean, of course, that even in this package that we have, which is as fun as it can be, still has its own weaknesses. One of the biggest weaknesses, of course, to the deck is, as you kind of see, until we get enough mana to add on that protection, your Paradise Druid and your Barkhide Trolls, even though they can protect themselves, they don't really get a chance to do much until we start going off. And if our opponent can start doing things such as countering Hydra's growth, countering Crystalline Giants, Kodama the West Tree, our deck kind of starts just kind of fizzling out. So just be mindful of that. If you have no way of building up your counters, same thing, the Ozolith and Hardened Scales don't really do diddly squat. But the only other way I would otherwise recommend ensuring that you can get to victories is, you saw, we can still play the best of 1, but honestly, I think this deck is a lot stronger and better in best of 3. So just keep that in mind. And as always, what I just mentioned earlier with the best of 3 sideboard plan, adjust your sideboard as always in order to make sure that you stay up to date with whatever the meta is going through. Most of our other biggest issues is in the main deck is we don't have also Graveyard Hate to start with. We would have to go to best of 3 to deal with Graveyard decks. So just be mindful of that if you do want to play this. And honestly, however, it's still more or less fun. And I hope you guys enjoy this if you are a fan of this style of deck. Okay, so for those of you that are still watching right now, thanks again. You are my true fiery friends. And as always, we'll stick around for just a second and I will show you the real way to upgrade this deck. Okay, so here are the upgrades I would recommend for everybody. So first off, yes, you could argue that you might want to splash into white and go Selesnya with your counter plan, but let's keep this simple for now and we're going to stick to mono green. And the reason for that is there's actually a lot of good cards already in green that'll already support the game plan. So real quick, creature-wise, you don't really need to change much of anything. I would actually say most of your creatures are already pretty solid. What they just need, however, is a stronger support plan around them. So the cards that we're going to consider adding in and upgrading is we will now add in copies of Ranger class. Ranger class will create not only a wolf creature token on that first level, but also when we attack, when you upgrade it to level 2, you can start putting +1/+1 counters on our attacking creature, which with a hardened scales out makes our creatures very big, very quick. And if we can get it to level 3, then we can basically start casting creature spells off the top of our library, which means we can churn through our deck a lot faster without having to constantly hold up stuff. Other upgrades you want to consider, we now have something in the 4-drop slot, Vivian, Arcbow Ranger. Being able to distribute with its +1 ability counters onto our creatures and giving them trample means the same thing, just like the Ranger class. We're just supporting that counter plan even more and making our creatures get stronger much faster. This also means that our single copy of Great Henge doesn't need to be changed. We only still need the one, and it still provides plenty of support even with just a single copy. Of course, there's no surprise to you guys that the upgrades that I'm looking at more towards is going to be towards the sideboard and, of course, in the land package. So 2 copies of Passeju. This can give you now main deck Artifact Enchantment Hate. We have a Castle Garenbrig, so we can pump out some of our bigger creatures a little faster. We're going to reduce the forest down to about 15, which also gives us now some room for Lair of the Hydra. Same thing, if everything gets blown up, you can use your Lair of the Hydra as a way to then just get through to our opponent with some last minute damage. As for your sideboard plan, since we are using now Vivian Arcbow Ranger, if you have to minus its 5 ability, that means we can get a creature we own from outside the game, i.e. from your sideboard, into our hand. So we've slightly tweaked the best of one to make sure that we could still get a creature out. As for those creatures, besides Chainweb, now Arachnir, and Destiny Spinner, for your Graveyard Hate, now we're using Scavenging Ooze. We're going to keep that Monoskellion. We'll now have a copy of Arasta versus those Spellslinger decks. Avabuk Caretaker is a werewolf that can also protect itself with its own hexproof and also distribute counters to everything we have. If we can flip it, then everything in our team has hexproof, which makes it very hard for our opponent to deal with. And of course, everybody's favorite type of Spellslinger Hatred, Carnage Tyrant. This thing has trample and hexproof. We've seen it before. Big body, does massive damage if it stays in and can't be dealt with. Otherwise, for the best of 3, we just moved a couple of our other cards around. We'll have that extra copy of Scavenging Ooze here and Monoskellion as well. Same thing, we'll have the extra copy of Destiny Spinner and Chainweb also in the best of 3 slot. And to help us out a little bit, we've reduced that. What that basically means now is Return to Nature now gets dropped 1 copy, and then we'll now squeeze in 2 copies of Heroic Intervention to make sure our go wide strategy, go tall strategy still gets extra protection besides Tamiyo safekeeping. But even if you don't do any of the upgrades I just mentioned right now, even the base version of this deck I still believe is actually pretty solid as is. So if you are interested, be sure to give it a try, and I'm sure you will not be disappointed. And there you have it, everybody. That is Jolly Green Counters for you. A budget Timmy deck that's a little bit on the different side, for instead of just throwing out huge creatures, we actually build them up to make them unstoppable versus our opponent. If you are a fan of this kind of stuff, whether it's budget deck techs or these style of gameplays, let me know in the comments below one way or the other, and I would love to hear from you. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone. And just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later.